Hello, my name is Georgina Rose and welcome to the Darling YouTube channel. On this channel we discuss everything related to magic, mysticism, religion, and everything on the fringes of esoterica. I'm your host Georgina Rose. I am a thelemite, perennialist, and polytheist. And in this video we're gonna have a bit of a fun, I would say fun. I came up with this idea because, you know, it's spooky season, people want to talk about the scary side of occultism, but actually it's not that fun. It is, what are the most dangerous occult rituals? And people are going to immediately have assumptions after I name the video this. Firstly, I think there'll be a lot of people coming into this video assuming I'm someone who is against occultism, against magic. That's not the case. I'm a practicing ceremonial magician. I'm a practicing occultist. And the reason why I want to talk about this is I think people have a weird view about what makes a ritual dangerous and what danger means. Because in our esoteric practice and in our ceremonial magic practices, we actually do encounter danger and we encounter risk. And I think as a culture, we have a sort of tendency to not know how to assess risk. I think most people have what we would call instinct injury, which means their instincts on what to do are essentially, you know, disrupted and thrown off by cultural pressures and narratives. And generally people just don't know how they feel about risk. People either run the second they see any sort of risk, or they are drawn to it immediately, right? They want to go towards whatever is edgy, whatever seems cool, whatever seems provocative, and neither of these approaches are correct. When it comes to risk, what you need to do is risk assess and know what risks are worth it and what risks are too far for you. All of these practices that I'm going to discuss in this video pose a lot of risk, and there are different types of risk that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about spiritual risk. That seems like the obvious type of risk when we're talking about this subject. Physical risk, because there's a number of occult practices that are actually physically dangerous for you, and psychological or mental risk. All three of these risks come into play in our esoteric journey. And whenever you're talking about approaching any sort of risky magical practice, you really want to sit with yourself and understand, you know, where are you at? What's your baseline and how much risk would be worth it? Generally, you want to have kind of a pro-con list mentality with some of these practices. Now, a couple of these practices, I do think I will like blanket say I don't think are good ideas, like I think are actually just too dangerous to be worth it. But some of these other ones I do think have value. You just need to proceed with caution. And you guys, I think, are going to be really surprised by what I've put on this list, because it's not all the stuff you would expect, though some of it is. So the first risky practice, and this is really coming from a physical risk perspective, is anything that involves the poison path. So the poison path, or beneficium, is a term for magical practices that involve the use of poison plants. This really comes to us from sabbatic witchcraft and traditional witchcraft, which are arguably kind of the same thing. You guys can argue about that below. And these practices attempt to bring back and revive the witchcraft religions that these cults will say were happening after the Christian conversion. These are trying to continue on with post-Christian witchcraft, you know, ideas like the witch's Sabbath, you know, communing with spirits in that way. And generally what happens in these practices is that you will use a substance called a flying ointment. A flying ointment is a salve, so that's an herbal preparation made up of poisonous plants, specifically ones from the nightshade family. The big ones are going to be datura, mandrake, henbane, and so on. Those plants are the main ones that come up. And this is obviously an extremely dangerous practice on a physical level. The basis of this is basically that image we all have of the witch riding on the broomstick comes from an allegation that basically women were taking these salves and putting it on a broom and then flying, leaving their body in a hallucinogenic state. This obviously is physically risky. These plants are highly dangerous, and it's very hard to control the amount that you are putting into your body. Now, this is not a widely practiced practice, and most people who are witches do not do it, but it is certainly something that had a moment of popularity back in 2020, and there are groups like the Cult of Sabbath and other traditional witchcraft groups that do this. Now, sometimes they don't do it in like groups, but you'll see members go off and do this. This is obviously physically dangerous and psychologically dangerous too, because specifically with datura, it causes a lot of delirium and can cause a lot of like psychological problems. The next dangerous occult practice that I'm going to talk about is one that I think is going to surprise people, and that is Enochian magic. So Enochian magic is the angelic language and system of magic that was brought to us by way of John Dee. John Dee was a really, really important astrologer and mystic in Christian Europe. He was the court astrologer for England and has arguably been credited for the rise of the British Empire, with his astrological predictions really guiding the way that that empire expanded. He did a lot of really important magical work back at that time and was really, really interested in communicating with these spirits that he called the Enochian angels. So basically, he gained contact with them and they taught him this secret language called Enochian. And based on his experiments with him and his scrying partner, Kelly, this whole form of magic sort of evolved. Now, John Dee wasn't really interested in doing magic with these angels. He was more interested in recording them. But as time went along, a number of magical systems began to sort of pop up based around this language and style of communication. There's kind of two schools of Enochian magic. There's Dee Purism, and that's people who just use the journals of John Dee to then do their magical workings, and Neo-Enochiano. So Neo-Enochiano are any systems that are using that Enochian base, but then adding upon it. Like specifically, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn has a number of teachings that are Neo-Enochiana. The majority of people who are doing Neo-Enochiana are actually working with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn's teaching. Now, why is this perilous? This holds spiritual and psychological perils. There's no physical danger in Enochian magic. But the thing about the Enochians is we have to understand what angels' role is in the cosmic order. So in this kind of cosmic, understanding of the world, angels are essentially like the army of God, right? They're militants, they're soldiers, and they're very, very virtuous and obsessed with rules. They're also, if you read any sort of angelic stories that have been passed down by saints or by other mystics, you'll kind of consistently see that angels are like sublime and horrifying and freak people out. There's a reason why the Bible has that whole do not be afraid thing. Whenever angels come up, they're generally terrifying. So what happens with people who get into Enochian is they tend to have really extreme visionary experiences. This is one of those systems of magic that really does give you visionary experiences at a really high rate. A lot of systems, when you have a magical experience, it's pretty subtle. It's not, whole visuals. You get a lot of whole visuals from Enochian as well. Enochian also is something you really need to space out. You can't do it every day. I talk a lot about the value of daily rituals, but there are certain practices like Enochian that cannot be done every day. So on the psychological level, people basically try to go really fast through Enochian and then become ungrounded and detached from reality. So there's a lot of risk with Enochian. And ironically, that's a Christian system. That's like a holy magical system, yet it holds a lot of risk. Risky type of occult ritual comes to us from Judaism, and it is Qliphothic magic. So to be clear, Jewish magic does not recommend doing this, but people do it. So basically, there's an entire Jewish magical system called Kabbalah. Kabbalah is basically like the received tradition of, mystic development. It's not like in the books, it's more taught, and it's basically an entire mystical understanding of the world. It has a really intense cosmology and metaphysics. Like if you've ever seen that tree of life diagram, you have a bit of an understanding of Kabbalah, or if you ever watched the intro to the anime Evangelion, you also have seen a little bit about Kabbalah. Kabbalah has a lot of complicated beliefs and it takes a very, very long time to study. But within Kabbalah, there is an idea called the Qliphoth. And the Qliphoth is often understood to be the inverse tree. Now, that's not entirely correct. Qlipha essentially means husk. And if you look at a thing of corn, you see the corn, like that's our sephirah, and that's the spear. Sephirah means spear. And then Qlipha is like the husk around the corn. That's essentially what the Qliphoth is. And the gateway to the Qliphoth is through the spear of Geburah, or Mars. So basically, if you go into Mars, you can cross over into the Qliphoth, which is essentially the shadowed husk around the spear. Now, there's a big misinterpretation that the Qliphoth is this like the tree of life goes like this, and then the Qliphoth goes like that, and it's like two trees, and you can either go up this tree or down that tree, and it's basically like two paths. And if you go up the tree, you unite with God, and if you go down the tree, you like become a living God, become your own God. Entirely incorrect, because people don't understand what that tree diagram even is. That tree diagram, that Kabbalistic tree of life, is literally just a diagram to help you understand what the spears mean. In reality, they're actually more circling. It's called the Ein Sof diagram. You'll see this one where it's like this looping circle going inwards. That's actually the reality of the situation. They're actually overlapping and sort of occurring at the same time. It's not actually like you climb up in that exact way. It's more like you gain more attainment, right? But you can't go down. Certainly you can't go down, because there is no upside down tree. That diagram is from modern left-hand path writing. It has no traditional basis. And so what happens is people try to like climb down the tree, and in reality what they're just doing is interfacing with the husk of the Sephra. They're not actually, you know, going down any sort of tree. That's not actually based in any traditional metaphysics. And you know, if you think about like what is a husk is basically like the trash bin. It's like the trash bin of divinity. You're like hanging out like a gutter rat in the trash bin of divinity. And everyone I know who has done Qliphothic initiations have reported very adverse effects. Typically they'll get visuals or sensations of being covered in slime or rot or like stuff that, you know, it's not a good idea. Qliphothic magic, it's just a no. That is a no. I've never heard a good outcome from that system. And a lot of the books that promote it are also what we would call dark fluff. They're bad occult books, really. Now, moving along, the next form of magic is another one that I actually do think you should completely avoid. And this is going to be interesting coming from me because, as you guys know, I'm a thelemite. You can see it right there. But this is the thelemic ritual, and I hate this ritual. I think it's bad for you. I think it's a bad idea, and I don't think you should do it. So this is Liber Samekh. So when it comes to thelema, one of the big sort of goalposts and, you know, sort of goals of being a thelemite, one of the benchmarks, you know, signs of progress, is gaining knowledge and conversation with your holy guardian angel. This is a really important goal for a lot of people because the big goal of thelema is to follow your true will and then accomplish the great work. And, you know, as a person, it's unlikely you know your true will. So what you do is you gain sort of knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel. The holy guardian angel is this spirit that's sort of attached to you and is given to you by divinity that's intrinsically linked to you. They're kind of like a higher consciousness, a spiritual double, and they sort of guide you towards your true will. They help you get there. And to contact your holy guardian angel, you have to go through a period of purification and a lot of prayer. You know, you pray a lot, and then you eventually gain that knowledge and conversation. There is a famous book, the Book of Abramelin, that is a really old school classic ritual of someone essentially gaining knowledge and conversation with their holy guardian angel. Of course, this text was written long before thelema existed, but it is cited a lot, and it is on Aleister Crowley's student reading list. Now, there are other approaches, right, to meet your HGA. You know, there's that daemon ritual. If you've ever looked at the Greek magical papyri, one of the first rituals in the Greek magical papyri is to gain, you know, knowledge and conversation. It's the same thing with your holy daemon. It's the same thing. And you see this again and again and again across cultures. Now, thelema came up with a really terrible approach to this. So a lot of thelemites do this thing called the bornless ritual, and that's how they get there. That's great. The bornless ritual is awesome. So is the sort of earlier version of the bornless ritual, the headless ritual, which also comes to us from the PGM. Now, Liber Samekh is terrible. Liber Samekh is basically, you know, since our goal is to have knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel, the spirit who will guide us towards our true will, you know, typically you're supposed to like become as pure as possible to do that. Liber Samekh says, nah, and goes the other way. So basically, this ritual is just invoking a bunch of miasma and pollution into your space so that your holy guardian angel feels bad for you and shows up prematurely and fixes your shit. This is a bad idea because if it doesn't happen like that, what have you done to yourself? You have just invoked a lot of miasma for no reason. And this specific ritual has messed up a number of historic thelemites and caused a lot of problems. I actually have an entire hour-long conversation about this specific ritual on my older podcast, Postmodern Iconoclast. It's called I think it's called Headless versus Bornless versus Samekh. It's like an hour-long conversation I did with Emma Tremagus. We got into why this ritual in particular is so hazardous. This can destroy your spiritual life, destroy your mental health, destroy your physical health. You do not want to miasma max. You want to instead, you know, do a little bit of harder work, do a little bit more discipline, and go through the bornless ritual, the Abramelin. That one's a little impractical for most people, but if you can swing it, that's awesome, you know, or the holy daemon ritual. You know, there's a lot of other approaches, or you could genuinely just pray from your heart and purify on your own for months at a time and eventually gain that knowledge and conversation. But yeah, Samekh, trash. Next is more a type of magic or type of mysticism, and this is alchemy. So alchemy is basically all about purifying impurities and creating something new. You take two things, you break them down, you take out the impurities, and then you recombine them to create a higher form. This is the basis of a lot of Western esotericism. Alchemy is it's a philosophy, it's a metaphysics, and it is a physical practice. And I'm actually talking specifically about the physical practice of alchemy. So the physical practice of alchemy can be really cool. You know, it's not just something people do in the past. People do it now, and it's awesome people do it now. There's a really good book from Scarlet Imprint called Alchemy Rising, the Green Book, that's all about like bringing back physical alchemy. I've been in people's spaces where they're doing physical alchemy, but the problem is with physical alchemy, a number of the things in those old books are dangerous or poison. Like alchemy uses a lot of lead. Obviously, we know lead is bad now. They didn't know back then. As well, a number of the sort of solutions to problems are just risky. This actually critique kind of applies to a lot of older materials. Like people say some things in the Picatrix, kind of not the best. Just generally with alchemy, you know, 1, don't blow up your house. 2, don't poison yourself with lead. So physical alchemy, I mean, really, if you just double check anything before you do it, this won't be a problem. But if you're like not thinking things through and you're just like recreating what you read in old books, you definitely can mess yourself up a bit. The next thing that can cause you some problems are rituals that involve bloodletting. I'm specifically going to use an example of one that I'm really fond of, the Mass of the Phoenix. This is a thelemic solo Eucharistic ritual, but there's a lot of other rituals from around the world that involve bloodletting. But I will say, bloodletting is a lot less common than people seem to think it is. Some people, you know, since they watch a lot of movies, seem to think all occult rituals involve bloodletting. Like I remember someone was talking to me and they would, at the beginning of their witchcraft practice, they bloodlet in every ritual. Like, no need. Unnecessary. But occasionally bloodletting does happen, specifically because the blood represents the life force, and of course the sacrifice of it is sacrificing your own life force. It's a powerful form of sacrifice. But once again, it's not common and it doesn't need to be done if you don't want to do it. There's never a need to do it. There's just some rituals that call for it, and you can certainly just skip them. I mean, like when you're in a group ritual space, I've been to a number of group ritual spaces, bloodletting has never happened in a group setting that I've been in, right? It's kind of like a rare thing, and you know, with bloodletting in general, there's a few risks. 1, you know, you could be unsterile and give yourself a disease. 2, you know, obviously, it can be triggering for some people if they have a history of like self-harm or something. If you have like a self-harm history, I don't think you should ever do ritual bloodletting. And 3, if you're bloodletting in a group, which once again, I've never seen happen, but maybe it theoretically happens. And certainly some like slop rituals you find online will say to like, you know, all bloodlet and then like rub your fingers. Stupid, don't do that. That's literally like never territory. Don't ever, but that could give you like diseases. So bloodletting holds a lot of physical risk. Also, risk number 4, you mess it up and you really hurt yourself. So if you are going to do ritual bloodletting, here is a safe way to do it. What you are going to do is you're going to get a diabetic lancet. This is what diabetics use to test their blood for their sugars. It's a little tiny thing and it pricks your finger. It's no risk of extreme damage. I mean, don't quote me on that. Don't like sue me or something, but it's generally a much safer way to do it. Also, like, you know, ways you see it in movies where people like slash their palm open, like that's really just theatrics. Like stupid. Just generally people do a lot of stupid things with ritual bloodletting, and once again, it's not that common. I mean, Mass of the Phoenix is really the only ritual I can think of immediately that does have ritual bloodletting in it, so just be safe with it. Take precautions. Also, honestly, like this wasn't even in my list, but rituals that involve fire, now that's a lot of rituals, a wide, you know, massive percent of occult rituals involve fire, candles, incense. Those also can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Do not burn your house down. I mean, I can do an entire video on like physical ritual safety and like how to like make your house, you know, safe and, you know, not like kill yourself in ritual by accident. But yeah, fire rituals also can be dangerous. Like, you know, a common practice is to leave a 7-day candle burning uninterrupted for days and days and days, and you know, that's risky. There's ways to do that where it's not that risky, but generally like that's a safety concern on its own. So there's just a lot of dangerous fire practices that you can see, and you just don't want to do those. That's also true for mainstream religions though. I mean, Zoroastrians, Christians, like there's a lot of traditions that use candles and fire. So just generally, you know, don't be stupid. The next dangerous occult ritual is lunar magic and shadow work. So these are things that are recommended a lot. It's basically exploring the moon, the sphere of emotions, and your shadow, which is your suppressed inner self. Now, these are not risky on a physical or really spiritual level. It's that on a psychological level, it can bring up a lot of negative feelings. The moon rules our feelings. I mean, the term lunatic means moonstruck, right? So someone being affected by the moon becomes a lunatic. I mean, the entire like, you know, folklore and like storytelling narratives about a werewolf is basically someone who's really affected by the moon and then completely transmutes into something else, right? So lunar stuff in general, I mean, it just can really mess with your head. It can make you very emotional. Generally, when people first do lunar work, they feel an overflow of emotions that they might not know how to process, and that can be really disruptive. As well with shadow work, I mean, this is recommended all the time, very casually even. If you have like a really intense trauma history, shadow work can basically make you re-experience things. This also sometimes even happens with pure meditation. Some people, if they try meditating, basically immediately start spiraling because they can't be with their own thoughts. Now, these things do not mean you shouldn't do these things. Even if you have these struggles, struggles, you still should do these things, but you probably will want to do it with a facilitator or with someone else around you. You know, this is kind of a personal sort of thing to parse out about how comfortable or not comfortable you feel with that. Now, the next thing that is dangerous is pretty obviously dangerous, and that's any form of magic that involves demons. I don't really think I need to explain why. I mean, that's spiritually dangerous, it's risky, and a lot of the time it's not necessary. A lot of the time what you're doing Goetia for, you could get in a number of other ways. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to even explain this actually. Demon magic has inherent risk. There's a reason why it's not that popular. You know, maybe don't do it unless you know what you're doing. Also, a lot of demon magic is Christian. So if you're a pagan, there's no point. I don't do it. I'm a pagan. What? Anyways, yeah, just obviously risky. Next risky form of magic comes to us from mysticism, and that is hardline asceticism. Now, I'm not good at pronouncing that word, so asceticism. That's what you're getting. Hardline asceticism basically means withdrawing from pleasure, withdrawing from hedonism, and withdrawing from the world. Now, this appears repeatedly in many religious traditions, specifically Buddhism, Christianity. You do see it in some pagan traditions. There's a lot of forms that asceticism can take. It can take the form of avoiding intoxicants, avoiding sex, avoiding food, you know, avoiding wearing collars, you know, there's a lot of different ways that can go. And the thing is with asceticism is it can really lead to dangerous places because, you know, it can get you falling into really what I would call disordered behavior, specifically with fasting. There was an entire phenomenon historically called holy anorexia, where women, specifically Christian nuns, would starve themselves to get closer to Jesus. There were a lot of deaths in the Middle Ages and the medieval period because of this practice. Now, most people who do asceticism don't do things like this, but stuff like that can happen. I think fasting in general is kind of a risky practice because if you have any sort of medical or psychological counterindication, it can really throw you off. I recommend if you want to fast, but you have some sort of physical issue or like mental hang up, to fast from other things, like to fast from technology, you know, to fast from drinking or smoking, because there are some ways that asceticism is amazing, right? Specifically avoiding intoxicants. That's great for you. I mean, most asceticism does make you better, but if it's taken to an extreme, it can really destroy your life. As well, I find asceticism is pretty high risk for people who are highly neurotic. They can really fall into like rumination and a bunch of mental traps. Like if you have OCD, maybe asceticism isn't ideal for you, right? It just, the problem with it is it can get pathological. Now, the last dangerous form of mysticism is the one that messes people up the most, and it comes to us from Eastern esotericism, and that is Tulpamancy. Tulpamancy is the practice of creating a tulpa, or essentially like other spirit in your mind that exist in your mind with you. Now, the risk with Tulpamancy is that it can essentially give you multiple personality disorders and psychosis. I see a really high spiritual psychosis rate from Tulpamancy. Now, spiritual psychosis is pretty rare. I don't see it a lot, but I will say Tulpamancy seems to really push people over the edge of spiritual psychosis very easily. As well, Tulpamancy is just not really necessary for any of the end goals of mysticism, so I would avoid it personally. Now, my friends, I was texting my friends about this video and this topic, and they have given me an honorary mention, and that is becoming an Agori. And if you know what being an Agori is, that's also on this list as honorary mention idea number 11. So those are all things that I think can be risky within occultism. Now, I'm not saying to not do these things. Well, some of them I'm saying to not do. Some of these practices are great, and that, you know, some of them I do. Like shadow work, I love shadow work, but is it risky? Yeah. Asceticism, do I do it sometimes? Is it risky? Yeah, but I assess that risk. And the way that you can maintain control over these things is to be constantly contemplating. A big thing that we need to do as mystics is contemplate our actions, contemplate our behavior, and note any changes within our psychology or body. So this is why journaling and keeping a magical record is so important. In general, occultism is beautiful. I mean, maybe like 70% of these practices can be beautiful things if done correctly and safely and with moderation. You know, always have control, especially have control over what you cannot control. So that's all I have to say. I'm Georgina Rose. I'm a professional tarot reader and astrologer. My booking information will be below. I'm leaving a spiritual retreat to Egypt in 2026. It is all full, but there are waitlist sort of spots, so sign up below to that. If you liked this video, please like, comment, subscribe, and if you subscribe for 93 days, you will meet your holy guardian angel. If you want to support the channel, if you join the Patreon, you get a bonus video every month, early access to every video, 20 plus pages of rituals I have written for you, and trust me, I don't write anything too dangerous. And if you're a high enough tier, you can get custom herbal preparations that won't be flying ointments sent to your house. Clubhouse, and mentorship sessions every month where we talk and I basically help guide you on your spiritual path. I also host the podcast Pagan Perspectives by Georgina Rose, which is on this channel, so you just need to click on my face, or on most podcasting platforms, or at least Spotify. I don't really know everywhere else it goes. It's definitely on Spotify though. And you can also find me under .darling, DAAT Darling, on Instagram, Twitter/X, Threads, Substack, Instagram, and TikTok. I hope you're all having an amazing day. Please, like, comment, subscribe once again, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye!